Hello, and welcome to the first installment of my Monday Memories, where I answer the questions that you've sent into Backstreets Magazine, where you can send them into askmax at backstreets.com. That's right, I'm going to answer all your questions. And I have right here the first batch. Now, somebody asked me, how did this come about? Well, I have to tell you, over the last 3 years, I've done about 250 shows with my jukebox band, and it's been a blast. And one of the fun parts of it for me is afterwards, we'll do a sort of meeting, a meet and greet they call it, where I'll talk to people. Sometimes we get 10 people, sometimes we get 100 people. It doesn't matter, but the questions are always really interesting. And people have said to me, you have such a memory, you have such a great way of telling these stories. And I appreciate that. And I thought during this crisis that we find ourselves in, like all of you, I'm sheltering at home with my wife Becky here, and we're going out very little, washing our hands a lot, using sanitizer, doing everything we're supposed to be doing. And to tell you the truth, I miss you all. I miss performing. I miss talking to you, meeting you, and hearing your stories about seeing me on TV, or of course playing with Bruce and the E Street Band through the years. So I came up with this way to at least you can see me, and at one point I'll figure out how to do this in an interactive fashion. But in this first installment, we're going to do it on Instagram TV. My son Jay, who you all know is a wonderful drummer, is also quite connected with technology, and he's pulled his dad, a thoroughly analog guy, into the digital age. So I thank Jay and his sister Allie for getting me involved in this. So that's basically it. Everybody, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, children, fans of all ages, please send your questions into askmax at backstreets.com. They'll forward them to me, and then we'll do this on Monday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So right here, I've got all the questions. Now I'm going to put them in this drum. There's a little bit of history with this drum. This is the 12 by 15 inch Ludwig tom-tom that I got in 1968. And back then it was known, the whole drum set had 2 bass drums, one which was stolen, which was actually a good thing for me. It was known as the Carmine Piece Set. Carmine was a dear friend and legendary, groundbreaking drummer from the Vanilla Fudge originally. Played with so many different people. Wrote Do You Think I'm Sexy for Rod Stewart. Well, he came out with this oversized drum, and for many years I used it with all my different groups. And when I first got with Bruce and the E Street Band in 1974, well, I didn't use this drum on stage, but I used it recorded. So I wanted to tell you that I turned it from what they call a rack tom, which is up on the bass drum, to a floor tom, because it had this beautiful resonant sound. And for some wild reason, in the early 80s, I took this blonde drum, maple, and I covered it with this wild flame covering. It was called Blue Flame, actually. It was psychedelic. I guess I went through a little period of that. And so when you see pictures of us sometimes in the studio, either on the River album or Born in the USA, I had this drum, but it was a kind of a psychedelic blue. I fell out of that stage, and then I took that covering off and refinished it. But this is the drum I used on the River, on Born in the USA, all those songs. It was my floor tom. So when you hear a song like Stolen Car, this is the thing I'm playing in the background. Or if you hear I'm a Rocker, this is the one I'm playing furiously with 8 notes. So this is a drum. Today I'm going to use it as my sort of raffle barrel, and I'm going to answer your questions. So first, I'm going to reach in here, I'm going to roll it around, and I have a question from Jim in Iowa. Here's the question. One of my favorite memories of an E Street show was in Chicago. Midway through that show, Jay took your place at the drums, and you watched the rest of the show from the back of the pit. I actually did do that, of course. What was it like seeing an E Street show from the audience's perspective and knowing your son was part of that band? Jim, that's a great question, as all these questions are. Incredible, life-changing experience to actually see your son play with the band that you grew up with and started at an age that was just about his age. Actually, he was a little younger when he did that show. I've said through the years that it's kind of a mixed blessing because everybody thinks they're irreplaceable. And Bruce came up with the idea it was around December of '08 when I was going to do the Tonight Show in California. Well, we needed a sub. We had a tour. He suggested Jay. So I realized I'm not irreplaceable, and he's going to replace me with Jay, which was one of the proudest moments of my life. And he did an incredible job, as you know if you ever saw him. Really worked hard at it. It was an incredible experience to see Jay play with Bruce and the E Street Band. And seeing the E Street Band was really incredible. And I'd gone out in front when Vinny Lopez, my predecessor, sat in with the band. And that was very interesting. But this, I got to see Jay in the initial days play for 3 songs, then 6 songs, then half the show, then the whole show. I only saw one whole show. That was an incredible experience. I was highly entertained by Bruce and the E Street Band. I thought it was incredible. And so that was kind of a unique experience, getting to be an audience member and getting what you all get. It was exciting. So thanks, Jim, for that question. All right, let's see what we got in the magic drum. Okay, this is from Jim Bradley from Robbinsville, New Jersey. If you could have been the drummer in any other band, past or present, which one would you pick? Beatles excluded. Well, I'll tell you, when I was a young drummer around 15, 16, 17, and the Beatles changed from the sort of Chuck Berry type rock and roll they played to their sort of what I call their psychedelic period, I thought it sounded like jazz to me. I was strictly into kind of straight ahead chugging, chopping firewood kind of drumming and music. And where I found that was in the music of Stax and Motown and the soul bands that grew up in that era, 66, 67. So I used to have this fantasy of playing with James Brown, who always had unbelievable drummers. I certainly don't put myself in the same class as a Clyde Stubblefield, who was one of the funkiest drummers around. In fact, he played on that song, The Funky Drummer. But that was sort of what I wanted to do, that real tight showbiz, presentational kind of drumming in service of a singer, frontman like James Brown. And I actually did sort of fulfill that much later on in my life and career. One day on the late night program on NBC, we had this little rehearsal studio. Studio is too fancy a word. It was more like a big closet. And all 7 of us would jam in there. And we would rehearse in the afternoon before the 5:30 taping. And one day we're playing, and suddenly the door burst open. And in walks James Brown and the Reverend Al Sharpton, and James Brown's manager, whose name was Judge Bradley. I think he was a judge. And he heard us playing, and he popped into the rehearsal. And he had just gotten out of incarceration, and he was just dying to play with all sorts of musicians. And he came in, he played the organ, he sang, he played my drums, James Brown. There's actually pictures of this, which I'll show you if you keep tuning in. It was unbelievable. Well, I never actually got to play with James Brown's band, but he had his announcer, Danny. He was the guy who would always do that incredible introduction that you can hear on that big box set they came out with. And he'd end up with, ladies and gentlemen, James Brown, and the band would kick in, and he was there that night. James wanted us to play him on to that intro. And there were a lot of cuts and a lot of little accents, you know, and if you listen to that, I think it's the box set is called Superstar, you'll hear that intro, and we learned it note for note. Bop, boom, 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 bop, 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 bop. And we nailed it, and James Brown came out. He didn't perform on the show, but he did come out through the curtain. They let a red carpet roll out, and he came doing the boogaloo and the James Brown down that red carpet while we played the middle section of Superbad. So, well, it was about 40 years later, but I did get that close to playing in James Brown's show, but it was a thrill. All right, let's see. Would you and that boss fella ever consider a drum off like you and Jay did? Which we did, Jay and I, in 2010 for a benefit concert that Tommy Lee organized in LA. Would be fun on an extended Candy's room. Well, Bruce has. This is, by the way, this is from Steve Mullen from Fairview Park, Ohio. Bruce has sat on my drums. He can play the drums. He's got a good beat. You know, I don't know about doing all those fancy crossovers that I do and playing those drum solos between each song, but he can lay down a beat. He can very often, so I don't know if a drum off will ever happen, but one time he did actually come on stage, and there's a picture of it on the internet someplace, and he put his guitar around my neck as I was sitting and playing the drums. And he had his hand on a chord, and he said, go ahead and strum it. So I strummed it, and I never heard anything in my life like that. It was just earth-shattering. But very often, you know, Bruce would, in the studio particularly, he would air drum. And I remember in the song Roulette, he had the beat in his head, and he was going diggity-doo-doo, diggity-doo-doo. But he wanted me to play it a certain way, where a drummer would play it do-do-do-do, bop, bop, do-do-do-do, bop, bop. He wanted me to play with my right hand on the tom-tom, which was a little more difficult. So I went do-do-do-do, bump, bump, do-do-do-do, bump, bump. And at the right tempo, it was do-do-do-da-da, do-do-do-da-da, do-do-do-da-da. And I was able to do it. But every time I played that song, you know, that's in the beginning of the song, do-do-do-do-do-do-do, ba-dum, ba-dum. Not that I have to think about it, but what I do think about is, am I going to make it through it? All right, we got a few here. Let's see. This is from Liam Keller. I don't know where Liam's from, but it goes out to you and everyone who's watching tonight. How much of a say do you have in any of the mixing, the drums in particular, on E Street Band records? Also, what are your thoughts on gated reverb on drums? That's that big sound. I've always enjoyed the sound it produces on a snare, and I'd like to know what I think. Well, I think anytime you get a snare drum that's just explosive, propulsive, concussive, I personally do like that. Mixing one of our records, it's not something I've ever actually even been in, because my job is to give Bruce what he wants in a session, and anyone I'm working for, or whether I'm even playing on my own records, which I've done a little bit in the past. You try to give the person, the artist, what they want, but the way that you do it. So once it's recorded, it's really up to the people who are going to finish it, whether it's overdubs or mixing it. So the producers or the recording engineers. I have never been disappointed in how my drums sounded. So I've never had a reason to say to, for example, Bob Clearmountain, who has mixed so many of Bruce's records, genius on the mixing console, you know, the snare should be louder, or that's too much bass drum. And I'm always, I don't hear it till it comes out. And I'll tell you, with very few exceptions, I think the drums sound great, whether it was me playing them or anybody else. Of course, every drummer has their personality, and it comes out in the drum, the way you address the drum, the way you hit the drum, the way you snap your hand back when you hit it, which pulls the sound out. But I was talking to someone the other day about, you could have 20 drummers lined up playing Misty Mountain Hop by Led Zeppelin, and they may get every beat, and they may get every lick, but they'll never ever sound like John Bonham. He had such a distinct sound. So I hope that the sound that I heard in my head was transmitted to you all, because when I heard Born in the USA and the records we did with Brendan O'Brien, I was delighted at the way the drums sounded. So I do my bit, they do their bit. Richard Schwartz from Manchester, Maryland has a question, and this is it. Have shows ever been canceled or postponed due to the illness or injury of an E Street Band member, not Bruce? If not, what is the closest a show ever came to being canceled for that reason? Well, I can tell you that there's never been a show canceled because a member of the E Street Band was sick or injured. Concerts come to mind. In 1977, we played in Boston. Gary Talent was as sick as you can be. You know, you don't care if you have a cold. You don't care if you're tired. But being stomach sick, we call it, that's a problem. He got really sick, played the whole show sitting down. Played fantastically, by the way. I have been hurt. I have been, and it's no secret to anybody who's seen me when I've had my back problems flare out. I have been laid out on the ground, unable to even get out of a fetal position, and they tell us it's 10 minutes to showtime, and by hook or by crook, or sometimes an injection of something they call Toradol, which is what they give football players when, you know, they go out and they're on that gator and they're lying down in pain, and then they come back. It's a muscle relaxant, and I've done a string of shows like that. And I can tell you, we did a tour of Europe in the winter one year. I can't remember exactly when. I know it was in the 2000s. And for 3 weeks, Bruce couldn't shake this flu he had, like a stomach flu. And he went out every night, sick as a dog. And those were some of the greatest shows we did. And when someone, the front man of a band, does that, who could easily have canceled it, I think there's only been 2 or 3 shows in my entire 46 years with Bruce that I've known Bruce that he ever canceled a show, usually because he just got so hoarse he couldn't even talk. He would sing when he was hoarse, he would sing when he was hurt, he would sing sick, he would play, and very rarely did we ever cancel a show. But we, to my memory, I don't think there was ever a time we canceled a show because one of the E Street band members was sick. And the other thing is, when you're playing that show, even if you're really sick, you somehow muster up the energy to get through it, because as excited as you are, we're excited too. We're controlling it because we're performing, and you have to be attendant to what you're doing. But I tell you, I've been up there hurting and sick, and we all have at certain times. And when it's showtime, you just muster up the energy, the courage, and you try to go out and play your heart out, and that's the idea. So we have a few more. Let's see. In the Darkness documentary, oh, and I get this question all the time, and I'm finally here tonight going to answer it to as wide an audience as I hope is watching. I keep telling myself that Bruce wasn't yelling "stick at you," but trying to get the recording to sound right. Did you have to keep telling yourself that? I know he's a big fan of the drum sound on Hound Dog, and I think about that on Candy's Room. Is that what the stick thing was all about? So if you look at the Darkness documentary, yes, I'm in a drum booth, which in the 70s was very popular to use. That was the way most people recorded. They put you in a little room, isolated, with carpeting and foam around. And I had done some recording on my own without that, but this was the way we started that album. It was also the way we did the Born to Run record. If you remember the records that the Beatles were making, or everybody else, pretty much except Led Zeppelin, you had that very dead doom, 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 with very little ring or resonance. And that was because you were in a drum booth very often, so you could isolate it and you can get whatever sound you wanted. It was very, very popular to do in Los Angeles, for example. So when you put a drum in a room that's full of carpeting and foam rubber, you can't get any sound out of the drum. You're just going to get a small little bip, bip. You're not going to get any big resonance like a and that's what Bruce was referring to when he kept saying, stick, stick. Steve and Bruce always used to say, stick. We couldn't get the right sound. And it was a problem that was vexing us through a lot of the recording we did for Darkness, where there were a lot of tunes. And an interesting thing happened. We were recording at the record plant in New York City, which is no longer there. Now it's actually the Club Birdland, which is on 44th near 8th Avenue. In any case, we were in a variety of studios. We started on the top floor in a very small room, and then we went to Studio A when it was available. And Studio A was a wide open room, and I came out of the booth, and I was in an enclosure of sort of panels, which, okay, the drums started sounding better because I was at least in the room, and we could control the sound and isolate me, but it was a little more robust. So we recorded a lot of songs. I know, for example, Prove It All Night was recorded in that room, Streets of Fire, and there's a longer story that I can't go into now, I don't have the time, about how we ultimately solved all of our drum sound problems. But the tipping point was we were done recording for a little while, and Bruce had not gotten the take that he wanted on the song, Darkness on the Edge of Town. So he booked some studio time, and they told him that the top floor studio was booked. Studio A was booked, we couldn't get in there. But Studio B, we can't use it because they deconstructed it. They took it down to the concrete floor and walls, gonna rebuild it. And Bruce said he didn't care, we'll go in there. We'll set up in there and we'll play in there. So we set the drums up in, I guess it was Studio B, which I think was on the first floor. And it was like a concrete room. I set the drums up in the middle. We had a couple of panels around me, but as soon as I hit the snare drum, we had this incredible sound, and it was from the room. It wasn't the close miking, it was the room sound that was the elusive sound we were looking for. And that was the only song that was cut in that room. And then I put the tambourine on it. And we had listened to a lot of records to try to figure out how to get a sound. One of the bands we listened to a lot was the Raspberries. That song, Overnight Sensation, because they got a tremendous sound. And it was created by putting the drums in a room and just opening up some room lights in the ceiling. Later on, during the Born in the USA sessions, it was not a problem. We were in the Power Station, which was a fabulous room to play drums in. The best room I've ever been in to play drums. And Bob Clearmountain had two Shure 57s up in the ceiling. It was an odd-shaped ceiling. And that's the drum sound that you hear on the song Born in the USA and that record, eliminating the close mics and getting the resonance of the drums. So if you can tune them properly, which I eventually learned how to do, and you get a great room, the rest is just playing. All right, hope you're enjoying this. I am. This is from Peter Yan in Toronto, Ontario. One of my favorite places to perform. Just recently did with the jukebox. And Peter wants to know, how do you teach or have a son pursue the same career as you with as little conflict as possible? That's very interesting. So Bruce came in to the rehearsal in New York for the Super Bowl, which was in January, the rehearsal was, of 2009. And he came in and he gave me a piece of scratch paper with 150 songs written on it. And he said to give it to Jay to get him to start working on these songs, transitioning him into taking my place when we went live with The Tonight Show in Los Angeles. So I gave it to Jay, and he started working on his own. He had a practice space at home, and that's just how he taught himself how to play the drums. I had nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that my son became a drummer and in 2019 was voted #1 drummer by the readers of Modern Drummer in the rock category. By the way, that's something that I never accomplished, so I'm thrilled for my son, very proud of him. Jay started working it out, And, I was busy every day working in TV. But the first time I went out to see him play, to hear him play in the little rehearsal place he had, I'm in the back of the room and he's playing. And he started out like he basically did to teach himself to play the drums. He played with the record. Then he put his own spin on it. And I started to listen to him and I said, well, it's not quite what I do, Jay. And he was cool. He said, well, let me show me what you do. So I did. And then he did it in a little different. And it was a couple songs. And finally said, Dad, I'm not you. I can only do this the way I do it. And by the way, I've got 150 songs to learn in like 2 months. I'm entering my freshman year of college. I'm in college. He was. I've got to do it my way. And my generation of parents would give your kids every kind of lesson. Karate, Kumon, learning everything. Jay with the drums, it was something he wanted to do on his own for fun. And he certainly did it. So I backed off because I realized, you know what? It's like teaching your kid to drive. At a certain point, they got to do it themselves. And he did. He did a marvelous, incredible job. A yeoman's job, which means he nailed it. He killed it. And there was some stuff he played differently than me, but he put his own spin on it. He channeled the essence of what I did all those years with Bruce's songs. And in fact, Bruce at one point suggested to Rolling Stone magazine, the publisher of Rolling Stone, what Jay Weinberg has done, this is incredible. You got to do a little story on him. So there was a story, a full page in Rolling Stone on Jay. Again, I never got anything like that, but he certainly deserved it. And it was how, he channeled me, but he did his own thing. And I got to say, it was an amazing moment for me and the rest of my family to have him pull that off. But that's the thing. There was no conflict at all. And by the way, in my humble opinion, I think Jay's a much better drummer than me. So check out Slipknot when they come back, and then check me out again when I come back, because at some point, we'll be back. All right, this is from Mark Streegers from Spanaway, Washington. At what point, this is a drummer question, at what point did you decide to primarily use the open-handed or match-handed drumming method versus the traditional method? Did Ringo Starr have an influence on your decision? Ringo had an influence on almost every decision I made when I was a teenager. You're looking at a stone-cold Beatlemaniac since I first heard them in late 1963. That's a whole other story. But you ask a great question, because the traditional way of playing is, he says, open hand, which is military style, where, they used to march and the drum was slanted. So you couldn't play like this, it was awkward. So you had to play like this because it was tilted. And that's how I learned. But then I saw Ringo, and every drummer I knew wanted to emulate Ringo. When I finally saw him on February 9th, 1964, and he was playing match grip. Or in the States, they called it timpani style, which is how timpani players play. But actually, timpani players play open with your thumbs up. Ringo played with his thumbs down. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but there was a wonderful jazz drummer who was a major influence on Ginger Baker. And he was the most famous drummer in England, really. And he played match grip. But I started doing that because amps got bigger, guitar players got louder, and you couldn't get enough power, at least I couldn't, from playing the traditional way. So I switched it around, and I always played with the thick end of the stick on the drum to get even more volume. And when I started playing on the Conan show, I had learned this way. I can't do a closed roll match grip. I have to hold it open style. In fact, on Born in the USA, the song, those are all double stroke rolls at the end. But very fast. Drumming is basically single and double strokes. But I digress. So I would play like that, and you get more power. when I went back with Bruce on '99, Bruce and the E Street Band, I had been playing at that point only pretty much match grip for years on the TV program, so I was used to that. And for about a week and a half, I tried to do Bruce's gig with, you know, the old style, and I couldn't do it. I needed the power, so I switched back to match grip. But there's a variety of different grips you can use depending on the circumstances, and I've learned them all. But when I'm playing like a swinging beat, or if I'm trying to emulate my all-time drum hero, Buddy Rich, then I'm gonna play traditional, as we call it, military style, or as Jim said, open. All right, we've got time tonight for 2 more questions. And here's the second to last. Well, I just answered that. This is from Lenore. Who's your favorite drummer of all time other than Jay? Well, Buddy Rich is my favorite drummer all around because he was the history of the drums. And I saw him play many, many, many times. In the last 10 or 12 years or so of his life, he became what I would consider a good friend. And we hit it off. I'm not quite sure why, because, you know, he was a sweetheart to me. I had a lot of great times with Buddy Rich and memories of Buddy Rich, but Ringo in the 60s was like Gene Krupa in the 30s. He drew the spotlight to the drummer. And if you remember the first time they played on Ed Sullivan, which is the first time that I and most everybody saw them, although there was a film clip of the Beatles on the old Jack Parr Tonight Show about 2 months earlier, which I did not see. It was on at 11:30 at night. There was this zoom into Ringo, big smile on his face. So that set me off on, that guy's having the time of his life. I want to do the same thing. So I can point to so many drummers who, you know, are my favorites for the moment I'm listening to them. But in terms of, you know, how I wanted to come off as a drummer, it's really hard to pinpoint one. Although Bruce did when he inducted us into the Hall of Fame in 2014. He said a wonderful thing that really pleased me because it encapsulated what I've tried to do. He said that I found an intersection in drumming of Buddy Rich, Ringo Starr, Keith Moon, and Bernard Purdie, the great soul drummer. And that was a high compliment for me because some of my favorite drummers. And but you know, I once saw a kid on the street in Kingston, Jamaica playing, and he just had a hi-hat. He had the funkiest beat I think I've ever heard. And for that moment, he became my favorite drummer. Okay, this is from Jonas Engart from Stockholm, Sweden. Love Stockholm. Love playing in Europe. By the way, when it's safe, I can't see any reason why we all wouldn't be back out there playing for y'all, because it's fun for us, I can tell you that. So watch out, Stockholm and Gothenburg. So he asks, this is Jonas Engart, your collaboration with Bruce on stage is fantastic to watch. How you seem to be watching him every second. Can you describe how that works? How much improv takes place? Is it in fact you and him who lead the band on stage? Well, I'll start with that last part. The drummer leads the band in any band. When I was a younger drummer, even with Bruce for the first 10 years, I wasn't that kind of drummer, but he not only inspired me, but exhorted me to become a lead drummer. The drummer is like the white stripe down the road. Everybody can go where they want. The drummer has to be there for them. As Bernard Purdie said, the aim of the drummer is to be a helpful drummer. So in many ways, the drummer does lead the band by doing little pickups, playing parts that people recognize. You know, the worst thing in the world on stage is if you can't hear the drummer. The second thing is if the drummer's too loud. That's the second worst thing. So yes, the drummer leads the band. The front man, the leader, does the show. And my job with the E Street Band is to make Bruce's job easier, so he doesn't worry about me or anybody else. Now that wasn't always the case. He would have to not only do his show, sing his songs, play guitar, but have to train us on the spot particularly me in the early days, and that's for another time and place, maybe next week, that question. But we have a hookup, which he beautifully describes in his book, Born to Run, of, I never take my eyes off him, because I did once, famously, in New York City in 1975, in August, we did 10 shows at a place that's not there anymore. It's called The Bottom Line, 2 shows a night. The third night, 2 shows. Second show, we were live on the radio. I took my eyes off of him. The results were disastrous. It stopped the show because he gave a cue. I missed it. We had a talk about that. I'd only been in the band about 9-10 months, and from that day on, I never took my eyes off of him. Because the one thing you know about Bruce Springsteen, the one thing you're absolutely sure of, is that when you're on stage with him, or even the studio with him, you're never quite sure of what he's going to do. That's how close to the moment he plays it. So if you don't hook up like that, and in my case, it's watching him. I have a little camera on my drums, so when he goes out into the audience in a stadium, or behind me, there's a camera just on him. So as soon as he disappears, like on the side of the stage from view, it switches to the camera and I can see him. Took a little getting used to, but I can actually see him on the camera, and I can pick up his cues, because he'll be 1/8 of a mile away from me at the back of the stadium and go, "Max, hit me," and go like that, and I gotta hit him. And if I don't hit him, well, there was a moment playing back in my arms, or back in your arms, I should say, where I didn't hit him. And the fact that I didn't hit him with a snare shot, that became part of the song. So yes, I am a dedicated Bruce watcher on stage. I try to never, ever take my eyes off, because that's where the energy is coming from. So everyone, I've really enjoyed this. I hope you have too. It's casual, it's laid back. Ladies, men, children, send your questions to askmax at backstreets.com, and they're going to get them to me. And we're going to continue this next Monday. So until then, it's Max Weinberg saying so long, and I will be talking to you.